So what we're going to talk about in our video today is a jump into our new concept of patterns that we find in scales. But before we go into that, let's do a quick review of our scales, so that way we are all comfortable here. So the first thing that we want to remember is that we have 8 notes in our scale pattern, and when we get from our starting note to our highest note, which should share the same name, we are going to count those both as 1. So as we count through our D major scale, D is 1, E is 2, F sharp is 3, G is 4, A is 5, B is 6, C sharp is 7, and D is 1. Remember, like our musical alphabet, we go from A to G, and then we reset to A. Our numbers that we go through start on 1 to 7, reset to 1. So, what does this mean for us in terms of our patterns? Well, it means that we are going to talk about what sort of pattern we have with our major scales, and our major scales only. There are other kinds of scales, and those scales will have different patterns, and we will talk about those when we get to them. But our big thing is our patterns are based around the idea of steps, and these steps are the distance between our fingers or notes. So our 2 main types of steps that we're going to talk about are whole steps and half steps. So for violin and viola, our space of a half step is where our second and third finger touch. On our D string for violins and violas, we would have this from a second finger F sharp to a third finger G. Since there's no space in between our fingers there, that is our half step. For cellos, we would have our third finger and our fourth finger as a half step. So thinking back to our D string, we have our third finger F sharp and our fourth finger G. And since there's no finger in between our third and fourth fingers, I hope, that would be our half step. For basses, us is a little different because our instrument is bigger and our notes are spaced out more. So imagine we're at the top of our D major scale. On our G string, we would have a second finger F sharp, second finger C sharp, and a fourth finger D. So while we are skipping over our third finger, we have second finger and fourth finger, and usually all 4 of our fingers are pretty close together. So that's where we would have a half step there. So for violins and violas, any fingers that do not touch are a whole step. So let's say on our D string, we play a first finger E, and we play our second finger F sharp. We should have a space in between there because we're going from blue tape to almost yellow tape. We'll have a nice little space in between our fingers there. That is our whole step. From cellos, anytime we skip over a finger is a whole step. So if we're on our D string, first finger E to third finger F sharp gives us that whole step. We're skipping over our second finger. So our last one, basses, remembering our instrument's bigger, so our notes are spaced out more. When we skip over a large chunk of fingers, at least in this case, is our whole step. So in this case, if we're on our D string, we would have our first finger E on blue tape to our fourth finger F sharp, they're on red tape. In cellos, that's the same thing, blue tape to red tape. Oof. Yeah. So what does this all mean for us? Trying to calculate this as we're going through. So again, our refresh, there are 8 notes in our scale, but we only count the first and the last note as the same. They're both 1. D is our starting note and ending note, and we count it just like that. So as we're going through and we're looking at our half steps, violins were up here on the top line, violas on our middle line, cellos and basses on our bottom line here. So as we're talking about our half steps, as we mentioned before, we have our half step from F sharp to G. This is for everyone. So violins and violas, if we do a second finger F sharp, and we go up to our third finger G, we should have no spaces there. Cellos, from our red tape, F sharp, third finger, to our yellow tape, G, fourth finger. Or basses, and this is where this gets a little weird for you basses, fourth finger F sharp, going to open G. But if we slid our hand up and we played a second finger F sharp, we could then play a fourth finger G. So we would have that 2-4 that we had talked about before. That's only for you basses where it gets kind of weird. But F sharp to open G is the same as second finger F sharp to open G. Then as we go through our scale a little bit more, we only have one other half step, and it's right here at the end. Violins and violas on our A string. If we play our second finger C sharp just before yellow, we then finish with our third finger D, which is right on yellow. So this is our 2 and our 3 again, and that's where we have our other half step. Again, there should not be any notes in between C sharp and D because we have no space in between our fingers 2 and 3. For cellos, again, we're on our A string now, but we have third finger C sharp, and then we have our fourth finger D. So that's our red tape here for third finger, and then our yellow tape for fourth finger. Basses, this is kind of like that example I gave you back on the other slide, where we have a second finger C sharp, should be on red, no, it'll be on gray tape for you all. And then fourth finger goes up to that yellow tape, I do believe. And that's where we have that 2-4 for basses. So, sorry. As we see though, we only have 2 half steps in our major scale. We have our half step between notes 3 and 4, which is F sharp and G, 1, 2, 3, and then 4. So our half steps are between 3 and 4. And then our last half step, here A is 5, B is 6, C sharp is 7. So we have our half step starts on 7 and then ends again on 1. So again, our half steps are between 3 and 4, 7 and 1. And those are our only 2 half steps here. So our other interval that we have is our whole step. Our whole step is, if we think about it in terms of math, 2 halves equal a whole. So 2 half steps equal a whole step. But in this case, this is where we have our spaces. So for everyone, starting on our open D, and then we go to our blue tape, first finger E, that gives us a whole step. There is a note in between D and E that we have not talked about yet, but we can see on our instrument that there's a little space in between that blue tape and the very back of our fingerboard. And so what we're going to do is we're going to know that that space that we're skipping over is actually another note, which is a half step. And so from our open D to that first half step, and then that first half step up to our blue tape gives us 2 half steps or 1 whole step. So from D to E is a whole step. From E, first finger for violins and violas, up to F sharp is a first finger to second finger, and that's where we have that space in between our 2 fingers, and that gives us another whole step because we have a space there. For cellos, we have our first finger E going up to a third finger F sharp. We're skipping that second finger, so that's where we have a whole step there. We're skipping over a finger. Basses, we're going from first finger E up to fourth finger F sharp. Cellos and basses, this is still blue tape to red tape. So we have that F sharp there. We are skipping between F sharp and G for all of us. And now we have G to A. And for violin, viola, and cello, we are going from a third finger, G, or a fourth finger for cellos, up to our open A. Again, if we stretched our finger out just a little bit higher, we see we have our white tape there. But If we put our pinky on white tape, we would still have space in between our yellow tape and our white tape. So that space in between is another note that we have not talked about yet, but we know that that is a half step to that middle note, and then we have a larger space again to our A. So G to A is a whole step. And now for bases again, though, this is open G to first finger A on blue tape, and we're skipping over that space behind blue, which gives us that whole step there. Violin, viola, and cello, we are now going from an open A to a first finger B on blue tape. Again, we are skipping over that space at the back of the fingerboard where we would have another note. So since we skipped that space, we have a whole step from A to B. Basses, we're going from first finger A to fourth finger B. That puts us right on the red tape there. And since we're skipping over our two other fingers, that's where we have that whole step. For violins and violas, we have a first finger B going to a second finger C sharp. And since we're going from blue tape to almost yellow tape, and our first and second finger have that space in between, we know that that is a whole step. Cellos, we're going from first finger B on blue to third finger C sharp on red. And since we're skipping our second finger, that's where we know we have a C sharp. Basses, we're going from our fourth finger B, and we're sliding our hand up the fingerboard to a second finger C sharp. This is a little weirder for us to see, but if you think to your fingerboard, we have first finger on one tape, our second finger on another tape there. And I don't remember your tape colors right offhand, but that big shift that we have with our hand puts us on a whole step between B and second finger C sharp, because our first finger C natural is another note in between B and C sharp. So if we count through, we have whole steps, we have 5 of them. We have 1 here, 2 here, 3 here, 4 here, and then our last one, 5 here. So our whole steps are between notes 1 and 2, D and E, between 2 and 3, E and F sharp, skipping 3 and 4. So then our next one is 4 to 5, G to A, 5 to 6, A to B, 6 to 7, B to C sharp. So there's our 5. So now if we look at our pattern all together with all of our steps, we have a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step again, and then we finish with a half step. So 2 whole steps, 1 half step, 1, 2, 3 whole steps, 1 half step. Where we can see our pattern down here at the very bottom, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And this is our magic pattern that is the same for every single major scale that we play. All of our major scales will follow this particular pattern. So it's helpful for us to know where these little spaces are versus our bigger spaces. So we can take this and apply it to other scales that we do. So at this point, if you feel like you could explain this pattern and steps to a friend, you are good to go. However, if you're not quite so comfortable, you can post any questions you may have in this parking lot document, and I will answer them between now and our time in class together.